My son didn't scream. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam his hand on the table. He just stared at me, steady, cold, distant, and said, "Dad, you are the problem in this family." It was just 7 words. 7. But each one cut through the air like an icy stiletto, cutting deeper than any knife. I stood there, unsure whether to respond, laugh nervously, or simply leave. The floor seemed to creak beneath my feet, as if even the house had sensed the open wound in that room. The silence that followed was even worse. Laura, my daughter-in-law, looked away and pretended to arrange the napkin on the table. My granddaughter, who still doesn't quite understand things, looked at her father with that confused expression, like someone who realizes something serious has happened but doesn't have the words to describe it. And I just felt the weight of 40 years crumbling inside my chest. It wasn't the first time I'd been treated like I was getting in the way, but never before had he put it into words. "You are the problem." It was as if my whole life had been reduced to a nuisance, a hindrance, a broken piece that was no longer of any use. I wanted to speak. I wanted to scream, "Problem. I'm the man who gave you a roof over your head, who paid for your college education, who worked until his hands bled so you could get to where you are." But I didn't speak. The words died in my throat, swallowed by the knot that tightened around me. At that moment, I realized that the scene would never be forgotten, neither for me nor for those who were there, because certain humiliations don't just echo in the ear, they are engraved in the soul. And maybe that's why I'm telling you this now, because I know I'm not the only one. If you've ever been called dead weight, a problem, a burden in your own home, then you understand how I felt. Your heart races, your hands tremble, and suddenly the place that should be your refuge becomes the stage for your shame. But here's what my son didn't know. Problems can be solved, and I already had in my hands the key that would change everything. A signature. Simple, silent, definitive. Before I continue this story, let me ask you one thing. Comment below from wherever you're watching. I want to know how far my voice reaches, because every comment is proof that respect isn't a favor, it's a right. And subscribe to the channel, because every time you join us, every time your story appears here, we show the world that dignity isn't begged for. Dignity is earned. I go back to that moment. The table was set with deep plates, cutlery shining under the yellow light of the lamp. The steam from the soup still rose slowly, almost mocking the coldness that filled the air. Michael straightened his tie, as if he had just given an irrefutable argument in court. And I, sitting on the other side, thought, this is how he sees me, not as a father, but as a defendant. And me, I remained silent, quiet on the outside, but on fire on the inside. My gaze wandered around the room, trying to grasp any detail that would remind me that I was still someone. The bookshelf I installed myself years ago, the frame on the wall, holding the photo of Michael on graduation day, that same diploma I had bankrolled with sweat and sleepless nights. Everything there screamed how much I had built, and yet I was the problem. The lump in my throat turned into a silent promise, because if at that moment I couldn't respond with words, I knew that I would soon show it in actions, and it would be before the same eyes that judged me. It's curious how life has its symbols. That night, as I gathered my coat to leave, I noticed the antique fountain pen in my inside pocket, a gift from my father, inherited when he died. She had never looked so heavy, or maybe it was just the weight of the decision I was already beginning to make. My son believed I was an unsolvable problem. Little did he know that I had already found the solution. The house where it all happened wasn't mine, it was my son's. A modern apartment with white walls and huge windows in downtown Rochester. Every detail seemed designed to impress. The wrinkle-free gray leather sofa, the long curtains that parted to reveal the illuminated city, and the constant scent of imported coffee mixed with Laura's expensive perfume. It wasn't a home, it was a stage, and on that stage, I was nothing more than an extra forgotten in the corners of the scene. My name is John Walker. I'm 62 years old. My hands have been scarred all my life by wood, by sawdust, by the splinters that cut and healed. I've been a carpenter since I was 15. I learned the trade from my father, who taught me that a man's worth is what he builds, not just what he says. I built furniture, doors, stairs, and tables that still stand today in neighbors' homes. And above all, I built the house where my son grew up. A simple, light wood cabin, built with every penny I saved and every muscle in my body. There, he took his first steps, studied his first lessons, and dreamed his first dreams. And it was that same sweat, that paid for Michael's law school. Every overtime, every backache, every late night with hammer and chisel in hand, all so he could have what I never had. A diploma, a respected profession, a secure future. Michael grew up seeing the hard work I did, but it seems that somewhere along the way, he decided to erase from his memory what I became, so that he could be who he is today. Now, he's 34. He wears sharp suits, silk ties, and a Swiss watch on his wrist. He works at a renowned law firm, circulating among clients who talk about investments and contracts as if they were trophies. He's married to Laura, a cultured, elegant university professor who has never made a point of hiding her aversion to my simple ways. She didn't need to say anything. Her look was enough. A look that measured me from head to toe every time I arrived with my threadbare coat, my snow-worn shoes, my hands scarred by time. It was as if she thought, he doesn't fit in with the world we've built. And I knew Michael noticed. I knew, but I never defended myself. He remained neutral, as if he were always in a courtroom, coldly analyzing which side had the greater advantage. And in the end, his side was never mine. My wife, Mary, no longer had the strength to mediate these wounds. The disease had left her frail, often in hospitals and bed rest. In her rare moments of lucidity, she would tell me, "Be patient with Michael. He's forgotten where he came from, but one day he'll remember." I wanted to believe, but with each visit, with each family gathering, what I saw was a bigger abyss. Michael's apartment seemed to reflect this abyss. The shelves displayed framed diplomas, hardcover books he never read, crystal glasses that gleamed in the white light. Everything was so perfect, so calculated, that it seemed incompatible with the mess of real life. And then there was me, a simple man, sitting in a chair not made for me, listening to conversations about trips to Aspen, about expensive renovations, about my son's bright career future. Conversations in which I wasn't included, except when a cheeky comment came up. "Father, you wouldn't understand that. Don't worry, let me take care of it." Little phrases, spoken with rehearsed kindness, but which, deep down, meant, "You no longer have a place here." My granddaughter, Emily, was the only breath of life in that room. Her smile broke the ice. Her innocent questions rescued me from the silence. But even she seemed to quickly learn from her parents to see me as distant, almost invisible. And me? I watched. He kept every detail, every gesture, every word, because I knew that life is like wood. What seems solid can suddenly reveal invisible cracks, and the biggest crack was already there, in front of me. My son had forgotten that the pedestal he stood on didn't just appear out of thin air. It was built by me, stone by stone, effort by effort. But in his mind, I was no longer the builder. I was just the problem. Little did he know that the problem he wanted to discard still had in its hands the piece that held the entire structure together. And that piece could be moved with something as small as a signature. Since I was a boy, my hands have never known rest. While other kids spent the afternoon playing ball or splashing in the river, I was in my father's workshop, learning to respect the weight of the hammer and the precision of the plane. The smell of cut wood, mixed with the oil from the tools, was the perfume of my childhood. It was there that I discovered that I had no talent for long speeches or grand theories, but that I had the gift of transforming raw material into something useful, beautiful, and lasting. A door that didn't let the wind through, a table sturdy enough to support generations of meals, a staircase that didn't creak even after decades. When my father died young, that knowledge became my inheritance and also my survival. At 17, I was already taking on jobs on my own, and soon came the bigger contracts, custom-made furniture, complete renovations, projects that many said were too big for someone so young. But I delivered, always. It was years of sweat and silence. I never cared about being the man in the inauguration photos. I didn't need my name on plaques or cards. My recognition came from something else. Seeing families living in the homes I helped build. Seeing my furniture standing the test of time. Seeing bread on my children's tables. And Michael, my son, grew up in that world. I saw his eyes light up as I led him into the workshop. He was small, sitting on the high stool, watching in fascination as I sawed a board. I remember one time he took my tape measure and ran around the room, measuring the walls as if he was deciphering the universe. "One day I will build things like you, Dad," he said. But that one day never came. Little by little, he moved away from that sawdust smell and became enchanted by other environments. Libraries, moot courts, speeches, and arguments. I don't blame. I encouraged him myself. I always said, "Study, son. Go further than I did. Build with words what I build with wood." And he built it. But in the process, it seems to have erased where it came from. For years, my workshop was the anchor that held our family together. Mary, my wife, could rest assured, because the money for the orders never failed. When Michael wanted to study law at a prestigious university, it was my office that paid the tuition. While my friends were already dreaming of retirement, I was still working double shifts, accumulating new calluses on already tired hands. I remember entire nights spent hunched over planks, lit only by the dim light of a hanging lamp. The cold entered through the cracks, but I didn't stop. Every cut, every adjustment, was more than just wood. It was a chance to secure my son's future. And when the big graduation day finally arrived, there he was. New suit, black toga, diploma in hand. In that packed auditorium, I heard his name announced with pride, and when he came on stage, for a moment, he swore he would never forget what I had done. But promises made in the heat of conquest quickly evaporate. Time passed. He prospered. I've grown old. In the eyes of the world, my son was now a brilliant lawyer, surrounded by influential clients, invitations to events, smiling, photos in local magazines. And me, I became just the old man in the background of family photos. My competence, the thing that underpinned his every step, became treated as irrelevant. If I mentioned a carpentry project, he would respond with a half smile, as if listening to an old, unimportant curiosity. If I showed him something I had fixed in the house, he would just say, "Cool, Dad," but nobody does it like that anymore. It was as if everything I had built was a relic, something outdated, worthless in the present. And yet, every time Michael shook hands with an important client, every time he raised a glass at an elegant dinner, it was as if he were also lifting the invisible weight of the years I had spent hunched over wood, paying penny for the road that had led him there. Life has these ironies. I, who had always been the foundation, began to be treated as a useless weight. I, who gave the structure, became invisible. But it is precisely at this point that the story gains strength, because anyone who has built walls knows that even the most hidden foundation holds power. And deep down I knew there was still a way to show that my competence, ignored for so long, could speak louder than any elegant speech. A simple way, silent, and it's final. And that way would come with just one signature. It was a winter night when everything exploded. Snow fell slowly outside, obscuring the parked cars, and the wind blew against the windows as if trying to force its way in. Inside Michael's apartment, the contrast was almost cruel. The central heating made the air heavy, stuffy, as if each of us were about to suffocate. Mary, my wife, had just returned from the hospital, frail, pale, draped in a blue shawl that seemed enormous on her thin shoulders. The doctor had said the treatment would be long and expensive, and that we would need to reorganize our finances if we were to give her the comfort she deserved. I arrived with a briefcase under my arm. Inside, some documents from my savings account. Savings I've accumulated over the years, stashed away for emergencies. And what could be more urgent than saving the life of the woman I've shared 4 decades with? Michael and Laura greeted us with that automatic smile of hosts who strive to appear perfect. The dining table was set like a scene from a magazine, napkins folded in triangles, crystal glasses reflecting the light from the lamp, deep plates of steaming soup. But there was something in the air, something I only realized later, the invisible tension of someone already determined to set limits. We sat down. Dinner began in silence, broken only by the clinking of spoons against the china, until I pulled the briefcase onto the table. "I've been thinking," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We can use this money to help pay for your mother's medication. It won't cover everything, but it's a start." The reaction was immediate. Laura dropped her spoon and let it clatter against the plate, making a metallic sound. Her eyes narrowed like razors. Michael leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and sighed deeply, as if he were already tired before the conversation even began. "Dad," he began, with that rehearsed tone he used in court, "we've already talked about this. It's not healthy to keep messing with these things. You complicate things." "Do I complicate things?" I asked, not understanding. It was then that he leaned across the table, regarding me with the same seriousness with which he probably regards a defendant about to be sentenced. "You're the problem with this family, always with outdated ideas, always wanting to decide everything. You don't need it anymore. Let us take care of it." The words fell upon me like a verdict. A chill ran down my back, colder than the snow outside. Mary, beside me, put her hand to her mouth, stifling a sigh. Laura looked away, but didn't move a muscle to defend me. The silence in the room was heavy. Even my granddaughter, Emily, stopped playing with her fork and looked from one to the other, confused. I wanted to answer. I swear I did. He meant that problem had paid for every penny of his college tuition, that this problem had worked all night so that he could have the bright future he now had. But the words didn't come out. My throat was dry, as if I were swallowing sand. The only sound I could hear was the wall clock ticking, marking every second of my humiliation. Tick, tack, tick, tack. And then I realized something even more painful. No one reacted. Neither Laura, nor Mary, nor even the relatives who were there visiting that night. It was as if everyone had decided to accept the sentence. I was, in fact, the problem. I closed the folder slowly, trying to hide the tremor in my hands. I looked at Michael one last time and saw something in his eyes I never thought I would. Contempt. Not anger, not frustration. Contempt. It was at that moment that something in me changed. The pain, the shame, the feeling of being reduced to nothing, all of it mixed together and gave rise to a silent promise. If they saw me as a problem, I would find the solution, not in screams, not in discussions, but in silence. And one day, in front of everyone, I would show that I still had the most important piece in my hands. I got up from the table with a lump in my throat. I grabbed my coat and before leaving, glanced at Mary. She looked away, unable to bear the sight. Michael just straightened his tie, as if he had won another case. I went out into the cold of the night. The snow fell heavily on my shoulders, melting into the warmth of my skin. But inside, what was growing was not cold, it was fire. And that fire would not be extinguished until the day when, with a single signature, I would show everyone the price of underestimating those who built the ground they walked on. After that night, nothing was ever the same again. My son's words weren't just a moment of fleeting anger. They were like a door slammed shut in my face. From that moment on, every gesture, every look, every word carried the weight of a sentence already passed. I was no longer welcome. Visits to his house became increasingly rare. Before, I used to spend Sunday afternoons with the family, helping Emily with puzzles or fixing a creaky piece of furniture. Now, when I showed up, I felt like my presence was disturbing. Laura greeted me with that polite but icy smile and quickly made up an excuse. "We're leaving, John. We won't be able to stay long today." I understood. It wasn't her words that spoke. It was her tone, a tone that said, "You don't belong here anymore." One day, when I opened my bank statement, I realized that the joint account I had opened years ago to ensure financial security for the family was being used without my permission. Deposits I had painstakingly put down were disappearing into expensive renovations, luxury trips, and dinners at restaurants I would never set foot in. I called Michael and asked, "Son, what's going on with this account?" He replied with the arrogant calm of someone who doesn't owe explanations. "Dad, I'm managing. You don't need to worry about these things. Trust me. Trust me." The same phrase he said when he was a boy and hid some mistake. But now it wasn't a broken toy. It was my entire life being treated like a voiceless ATM. At Christmas that year, the chasm became even more visible. I arrived with a simple, carefully wrapped bottle of wine, a souvenir from a friend from the carpentry shop. I entered the apartment and, looking around, noticed that everything was ostentatious. Sparkling crystal glasses, a huge turkey on the table, expensive gifts piled at the foot of the tree. I placed my bottle discreetly in a corner, but I noticed that no one noticed it. While everyone toasted with French champagne, I held my glass of cheap wine alone. Emily ran up to me with her innocent smile and handed me a colored drawing. It was me, holding a saw, standing next to a wooden house. That broke me inside. It was as if only she still remembered who I really was. But the worst was yet to come. One spring afternoon, I needed help taking Mary to the doctor. I called Michael, hoping for at least some understanding. "I can't make it today, Dad. I have an important meeting." "But it's your mother's health," I insisted. On the other end of the line, silence. Then, the phrase that still echoes within me, "Dad, whenever you call, it's just trouble." I hung up the phone with a trembling hand. Problem. It was as if that word had become my new name. Even when I didn't say anything, the treatment spoke for itself. If I tried to weigh in on any family decision, Michael would roll his eyes. If I suggested something simple, like fixing a piece of furniture at home, Laura would smile condescendingly. "Let us call someone specialized." Specialized, as if 40 years of carpentry were worth nothing. At family gatherings, I felt the stares. They weren't direct, act, but they were there. Muffled whispers, conversations interrupted as I approached. It was as if everyone was following the silent script written by my son. The old man is a burden, a nuisance, a problem, and I, who had always been the foundation of that family, now walked like an intruder within my own history. It was during this period that I began to cultivate my silence. I stopped insisting on explanations, trying to be heard. I felt that any word I said would only fuel more contempt, and instead I began to observe, with each withdrawal from the joint account, with every glance, every door closed before its time. I was accumulating not only hurt, but clarity that the time had come to stop being seen as a burden, and to show once and for all how much I still had in my hands. It wouldn't be in fights, it wouldn't be in tears, it would be in silence. And when the time came, there would be no room for doubt. With each rejection, I nurtured a certainty. Life always has room for a final settlement, and mine would come with a single signature. After so much swallowed silence, I began to change. Not on the outside. On the outside, I was still the same slow-moving man with the worn coat and calloused hands. But on the inside, a new gear had begun to turn. It was as if each humiliation was a nail hammered into wood. The more they hammered, the firmer the structure of my decision became. I began to observe Michael with different eyes, no longer as a son, but as someone who had forgotten his own roots. He talked about investments, wealthy clients, international travel, as if he had been born with a silver spoon in his mouth. And I, sitting at the table, just took mental notes. Every arrogant word, every gesture of indifference was silent proof that he had no idea of the ground on which he was really standing. It was then that I decided to seek out an old lawyer, a longtime friend, Richard Coleman. A discreet man, with a low voice, close to retirement, but with eyes that saw what many pretended not to see. We met in his small office, almost suffocated by stacks of old files. The smell of yellowed paper and cold coffee filled the room. He listened patiently, as I spilled everything, from the joint account to the dismissive remarks. When I finished, he adjusted his glasses and spoke slowly. "John, you still have more power than you realize." They were simple words, but they ignited something inside me. Richard explained to me that the house, which I had built, was still in my name only, that the will could be changed, that the joint account was not irreversible, and most importantly, that I had the right to decide the fate of what I had achieved with my own hands. I left there with a folder of documents, but for me, they weren't just papers, they were keys. Keys that would open doors of freedom, or that would close once and for all the gates of an empire my son believed he controlled. I returned home that night with a different weight in my pocket. It was no longer just the fountain pen inherited from my father. It was also the certainty that, when the time came, it would be with her that I would write the line that would change our story. In the following days, I maintained my routine, as if nothing had changed. He continued visiting Mary in the hospital, helping Emily with her schoolwork, greeting neighbors on the street. But inside me, I was no longer the humiliated man. I was the man who carried a secret, and secrets have a silent power. Laura treated me with the same disdain as always. Michael only called me when he needed to move money, but I smiled inside, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just a spectator to my own downfall. I was writing the script for the turnaround. There was one particular night when I sat alone on the porch of my old wooden house. The wind blew hard, making the boards creak as if they were complaining of their age. I looked at those walls I had built myself, and realized this was the greatest testimony of my life. While Michael sought to prove his worth with contracts and parties, I had already proven mine with every plank, with every hammer blow. I took the fountain pen from my pocket and held it tightly. It was heavy, heavy with history, heavy with meaning. I thought of my father, who one day said to me, "Son, a man can lose everything, but if he has the courage to sign his own destiny, he will never be defeated." His words echoed as if they were spoken there on that cold night, and I knew I was ready to wait for the right moment, ready to respond, not with shouting, but with evidence, ready to show that the one they called the problem was still the owner of the foundation of everything. From then on, every family gathering stopped being a burden. It was, for me, an essay. I listened silently, observed the looks, kept the words. I knew the day would soon come when I would put the folder on the table, and no one would be able to call me useless anymore. The funny thing is, when you keep a secret like that, the world seems different. Humiliation hurts less because you know it has an expiration date. contempt weighs less, because you know it will soon be returned double, and loneliness is no longer so cruel, because it becomes preparation. I, who before saw myself as a burden, now walked with the calm of someone who knows they hold the final word in, their hands, and she would come, not in long speeches, not in tears, but in the dry sound of a signature. The confrontation did not happen in silence, nor in secret. Life wanted it to be in front of everyone, as if destiny itself had prepared the stage for my turnaround. It was Emily's birthday, my granddaughter. Michael's apartment was packed. Relatives, co-workers, neighbors from the building. The living room glowed under the lights of modern chandeliers, and every detail seemed to scream sophistication. The lined crystal glasses, the three-tiered cake in the center of the table, the presents stacked beside the birthday tree decorated with gold ribbons. I arrived in a heavy coat, carrying my old leather briefcase with me. No one realized the weight she carried, but I knew. It was the same folder I had taken to the lawyer weeks before, now ready to be opened at the right time. I stood in a corner, watching. I watched Michael circulate among the guests as if he were the perfect host. Tie adjusted, smile practiced, glass in hand. Laura glided through the room with her studied elegance, greeting everyone as if she were the owner of an empire. And me? I was just the old father, greeted with a hurried handshake, forgotten amidst the conversations. But that didn't bother me anymore. On the contrary, the more invisible they made me, the stronger the certainty grew within me that soon they would no longer be able to ignore me. It was during the toast that it all began. Michael raised his glass and said a few kind words to his daughter. Then he let slip, perhaps out of confidence, perhaps because of too much wine, a comment that landed like a stone in my chest. And may Emily grow up without problems, surrounded only by those who truly build her future. Some guests laughed, others just smiled, not understanding. But I understood. It was for me. It always was. I felt my blood boil, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I placed the folder on the table. The sound of leather hitting wood made a few eyes turn to me. "Michael," I said, my voice calm but firm. "May I say a few words?" He laughed, that short laugh he used when he wanted to put someone down. "Dad, please, you don't have to. This isn't the time." "It's exactly the moment," I replied. The room fell silent. Even the children realized something was about to happen. I looked around, attentive faces, growing curiosity, anticipation in the air. I opened the folder slowly. The click of the clasps echoed, like a gunshot. I took the documents out and placed them on the table in front of him. "You always said I'm the problem." I paused, letting the words breathe. "Well, today I'll solve that problem." Michael frowned, still confused. He picked up the first few pages, read quickly, and his face changed color. Laura, upon realizing, went forward to see too. And then came the reaction. A blush of disbelief, followed by an embarrassed silence. I maintained my posture. "Here's the transfer of the house. It's no longer in your name under any circumstances." I pushed another paper. "Here's the joint account cancellation. One more document. And here, the New Testament." The words hung heavy in the room. I didn't scream. I didn't need to. Each document spoke for me more powerfully than any speech. Michael tried to smile, but his mouth trembled. That's a misunderstanding. You can't just—" "Yes, I can," I interrupted. My voice was firmer than ever. I looked around and saw my relatives' eyes fixed on me. People who had always seen me as the silent man now regarded me with respect. I built everything. With these hands, I raised my calloused hands in front of everyone. And if anyone here has forgotten that, I'll make sure to remind them. Nobody moved. The silence was so thick that even the popping of the candles on the cake seemed too loud. Emily, innocent, ran up to me and grabbed my arm. "Grandpa, why is Daddy angry?" Her question cut through the air like a blade. Michael didn't answer. Laura looked away. I took a deep breath and simply said, "Because sometimes, darling, the truth hurts." I left the documents on the table. There was nothing left to prove. And while everyone was still digesting what they had just witnessed, I took a step back and saw the reflection of the scene. A simple man, finally standing tall before those who had always tried to put him down. I didn't need applause. The look of astonishment, the suppressed murmurs, the heavy silence, that was more than enough. In that instant, I knew. The confrontation had begun, but the climax was yet to come. The silence in that room was so heavy, it seemed to have a body. No one touched the cake. No one raised their glass. Even the children, realizing something bigger was happening, stood still, staring at the adults. Michael remained seated, the documents in his trembling hands. He scanned the pages as if searching for a gap, a stray line that might undo the blow. but there were no gaps. With each word he read, his face grew redder, then paler, then redder again. Laura tried to intervene. "That's not valid, John. It can't be." Her voice trailed off mid-sentence. "There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake." My answer was low but firm. "What's written there is law." I could feel the eyes on me. Some were astonished, others with admiration, and there were also those who were ashamed for never having defended me. Michael then stood up abruptly. The cup he was holding fell to the floor and shattered into 1,000 pieces. "How could you do this?" he shouted, his voice cracking. "After everything I've built, you come and just take me out of the picture?" I took a deep breath. I looked straight at him, unblinking. And that's when I said the phrase that, to this day, echoes in the memory of everyone who was in that room. "You called me a problem. Well, know this. It was this problem that sustained your entire life. Now, let's see how you get along." Without it, the sentence fell like a hammer. I didn't need anything else. Michael stood frozen, unresponsive. Laura covered her mouth with her hand, trying to hide her shock. Some guests sighed loudly. Others lowered their eyes, as if unwilling to witness the downfall of a man who had always thought himself invincible. Emily, confused, ran to me again. He held my hand, as if seeking reassurance, and I squeezed hers tenderly, because deep down, she was the only innocent one in that story. Michael, still standing, tried to regain his posture. "This isn't going to stay like this," he murmured, but his voice no longer held authority. It was just the grumble of someone who knew he had lost. I remained silent, because at that moment, I understood that there was no longer any need to shout, nor to justify myself. The strength was not at the height of the voice. It was in the evidence I had just presented, and in the phrase I left engraved in everyone's hearts. I looked around. I saw my brother George, who had always kept his distance, nod silently, as if finally recognizing the value he had previously ignored. I saw some of Michael's friends exchange awkward glances, realizing that the brilliant lawyer they so admired was nothing more than an ungrateful son exposed in front of his own father. I saw Mary, my wife, with tears in her eyes, but not from sadness. There was something different there, a glow of relief, maybe even pride. I let the silence speak for me. I picked up the folder, calmly closed the clasps, and held it against my chest. I didn't need anything else. The words spoken, the documents delivered, and the truth exposed were enough to transform that environment. I felt the air change. It was as if, for the first time in many years, I had my space back. Not as a visitor, not as a burden, not as a problem, but as the man who supported that family, and who now had regained the right to be respected. Michael sat back down, defeated. He didn't look at me anymore. The hand that was still holding a piece of paper was shaking, and each tremor was like a silent confession that he never expected this turn of events. Emily's birthday party didn't end in music or laughter. It ended in silence, with everyone trying to process what they had witnessed. And deep down, I knew that was exactly what I wanted, for each person there to take home the memory of that night, of the phrase that ended an era of humiliation. Before I left, I leaned over and kissed Emily's forehead. She smiled innocently, not understanding the extent of what was happening, and I whispered softly to her, as a promise, "One day you will understand that courage is also inherited." I walked out the door with firm steps. Snow was still falling outside, covering the streets in white, but inside me, for the first time in years, there was no cold. It was hot, the warmth of someone who, after a lifetime of being called a problem, has finally become the solution to their own dignity. After that night, nothing was ever the same again, not just for me, but for everyone who was present. What happened in Michael's living room wasn't just a family argument. It was a public trial, and the sentence was recorded not in the papers I left on the table, but in the eyes of every witness. In the days that followed, silence became the greatest weapon. Michael didn't call me, didn't send messages, he didn't show up at my house, but I learned from neighbors and relatives that he was trying to justify the scene. He said I was confused, that I had made rash decisions, that someone must have influenced me. But there was no erasing the image of him, standing trembling before everyone, as I spoke those words that stripped him of all his arrogance. People were talking. A distant cousin called me just to say, "John, I will never forget your courage." That was historic. Even Michael's colleagues who were at the party began to look at me differently. I, who had previously been treated as the lawyer's simple father, was now seen as the man who, with a single signature, dismantled his son's entire mask in front of a makeshift audience. And it wasn't just his reputation that he lost. The practical consequences came quickly. The joint account, which for years he had used as a personal safe, was no longer within his reach. Withdrawals are over. The cards have expired. And suddenly, the luxurious trips, The expensive dinners, the champagne parties were no longer so frequent. It was as if the world, for the first time, had shown Michael that the rug beneath his feet wasn't his, it was mine. Laura also felt the impact. I remember meeting her weeks later in the hospital hallway when I went to visit Mary. She looked me up and down, but the haughtiness was gone. There was no longer disdain in his eyes, only a bitter weariness. She murmured a barely audible, "Good morning," and I just nodded. In that instant, I realized the woman who had always measured me as if I were inferior now had to deal with the truth that the comfortable life she displayed came from a foundation she had never respected. Within the family, the change was even clearer. My brothers, who had always remained silent, began to look for me. Some confessed that they had heard Michael making comments behind my back, calling me dead weight, but never had the courage to tell me. Now they viewed me with renewed respect. Not out of pity, but out of recognition. Recognition that I not only endured the contempt in silence, but also chose the exact moment to turn the tables. Mary, my wife, perhaps felt the effect the most. From the hospital bed, he held my hand and whispered, "I always knew you would find a way to get back up." Her eyes shone with pride, and that glow was more valuable to me than any applause. But for Michael, the consequences were cruel. In the law office, whispers began. Some customers commented on the scene at the daughter's birthday, and no matter how much he tried to hide it, Rochester is a city that holds stories, and the story of a son who humiliated his father and was disarmed in public does not go away easily. One day I heard that a longtime client had decided to look for another lawyer. If he can't handle his own father, how will he handle other people's business? They said. This phrase, repeated in the corridors, was like a poison that began to corrode his reputation. I didn't need to do anything. Life was doing for me. And inside the house, the atmosphere has also changed. Laura, previously confident, began to question his decisions. The looks exchanged between the two were no longer the same. Emily, innocent, still sought me out whenever she could, but even she could tell that something had changed in her parents' behavior. The fights, the long silences, the accusatory looks, all of this started to appear after that night. And me, I felt light, not because he wished them ill, but because, for the first time, he did not bear the burden of ingratitude alone. They now had to deal with their own choices, with the consequences of their own contempt. I've often thought about how an entire life can be summed up in small symbols. In my case, it was a fountain pen. With it, I signed the change of ownership of the house. With her, I removed my name from the joint account. With her, I rewrote the will. 3 signatures, 3 gestures that dismantled years of arrogance and gave me back something I thought I had lost. The right to be respected. Some people asked me if I didn't regret it, if I wasn't afraid of pushing Michael away for good, and I always answered the same. A father can endure distance. What he cannot do is live without dignity, and that was the greatest consequence of all. I got my voice back. That voice he tried to silence, that presence they wanted to turn into a burden, returned to occupy the place that had always been hers. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need violence, just courage and silence. Today, when I pass by the workshop, I feel proud. Every scar on my hands tells the story of everything I've built. And now, unlike before, I don't feel invisible, because I know that night, in front of everyone, I proved that even the most humiliated can turn the game around. Michael still carries the weight of his own fall. I carry the lightness of having risen up. Time passed, days turned into weeks, and weeks stretched into months. But that night, the night I laid the documents on the table and handed my son the weight of his own arrogance, never left the memory of anyone there. Rochester is too small a town for secrets to survive. News spread like a cold winter wind, sweeping through streets, corners, and cafes. It wasn't long before everyone knew the scene. The lawyer's son, dressed in an expensive suit, exposed before his carpenter father, who, with a simple signature, shattered the mask of superiority he'd worn for years. For me, life has returned to a simpler pace. Started waking up early as usual, brewing my black coffee and smelling the wood in the workshop. Routine was never a problem for me. I always found peace in the sound of the saw, the rough feel of the boards, the creak of the house I built with my own hands. But there was something different now. The weight I had been carrying on my chest, the weight of feeling invisible within my own family, had disappeared. Mary, even though she was still fragile from the disease, seemed to be breathing better. She looked at me with silent pride, as if she saw in her husband not only the man who always worked hard, but also the man who knew how to choose the right time to get up. One afternoon, while holding my hand, she said, "John, you gave me back my peace." Those words were worth more than any inheritance, more than any property. And what about Michael? He went his own way, but he was never the same again. He lost customers. He lost credibility. He lost his aura of invincibility. He still tried to keep up appearances, smaller parties, practiced smiles, but everyone knew something in him had broken. Laura, his wife, no longer displayed the same confidence. The haughty gleam in her eyes was replaced by constant worry. And Emily? Oh, Emily still sought me out, still embraced me with the purity only a child can possess. To her, I was still just the grandpa who could fix anything. And that, for me, was enough. Sometimes, when I walk down the street and meet people I know, I notice how their looks have changed. I'm no longer seen as the silent old man. I'm remembered as the man who had the courage to turn the tables. Some greet me with renewed respect. Others even ask for advice. And I smile, because I never sought out the stage. But when life pushed me to the center, I knew how to stand. Today, sitting on the porch of my wooden house, I like to watch the swing in the backyard, still resisting the test of time. The wind blows through the trees, bringing the smell of wet earth. I close my eyes and remember every humiliation, every swallowed silence, every time I was called a problem. And I realize that all of this has brought me here, until that moment when I can say, without fear, that dignity cannot be begged for. She conquers herself. And when you get it back, no one can take it away again. Maybe one day Michael will come looking for me again. Maybe you come looking for forgiveness. Or maybe you just come looking for what you can no longer have. I don't know how I'm going to react. Maybe he'll listen. Maybe he won't. But I know one thing. I will never forget what I experienced. Because those who have already tasted the bitter taste of betrayal learn to savor the value of their own dignity even more. The fountain pen I used that night is still with me. It rests in the drawer next to the bed, wrapped in a piece of old fabric. Every now and then I take it out just to remember it wasn't just a signature. It was the end of a story of contempt and the beginning of a new story, written not with words, but with respect. Today, when I think about legacy, I no longer think about material inheritances. I think of something bigger, the legacy of not allowing anyone to erase who you are. If my granddaughter inherits anything from me, let it be this: the courage not to bow down to injustice. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. You may lose assets. You may lose status. You may even lose the respect of those you love most. But if you don't lose the truth about who you are, then nothing is really lost. Now I want to talk to you, who listens to me. Have you ever tried to silence your voice inside your own home? Have you ever been made to feel invisible, as if nothing you did had any value? Tell us in the comments. Your story matters. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because every time you comment, every time you participate, we show together that respect is not asked for on your knees. Respect is earned by standing up. And it was on my feet that I ended the most humiliating night of my life. I stood and signed what needed to be signed. And it is standing that I continue now, lightly, knowing that even those who called me a problem will never be able to erase what I am. The man who built with his own hands, who sustained with silence, and who won with a signature.